Hi everyone, welcome to Pinkboard SD Arts. This is Joe. In this video, I will show you how I painted our cat Hunter. Hunter has been a very special part of our life, and I will talk more about his story throughout the painting process. In this painting, I use a limited palette of 8 colors. I will also talk more about layerings, color mixings, and details that bring this portrait to life. Let's begin. I sketched Hunter on the canvas with pencil first, then I went over the sketch with a very thin out layer of burnt umber so it wouldn't dissolve into the paint later on. I took several pictures of Hunter, and I chose this one because you can clearly see his features and face. It probably captures him the best. I used most of the colors in my palette for the background, except for Quinacridone Magenta. I think the background plays an important role in complementing the portrait of Hunter. His fur contains a lot of contrasting colors, black, brownish tone, and light grays. So I chose a mix of burnt umber, burnt sienna, raw sienna, yellow, and white to brighten the background and harmonize with his fur. I remember the very first time I met Hunter in 2021. He was very skinny but incredibly friendly and sweet. Even though he didn't know us, he would come right up to me and my husband, almost as if he was saying, "I want to pet you and I want you to pet me." He was such a gentle soul. After we started feeding him, he began visiting us more and more. Eventually, he came by every single day. He didn't have a color, so we weren't sure if he belonged to someone or if he was just a stray. We set up a box outside for him and even put one inside with a blanket so he would have a cozy place to sleep. He liked being in the house for a little while, but he also enjoyed spending a lot of time outside. I don't think he was truly feral. He was just too friendly and comfortable around people. Since the first time we met him, Hunter has been there every day. Every time we get home from tennis, whether it's around 8:30 p.m. or 9:30 p.m., he was usually waiting for us, either in the courtyard or hiding somewhere nearby. As soon as we walk into the courtyard, he appears, acting like he just happened to be there and noticed us, but we know he's been waiting for us to come home. Then one day, he showed up wearing a green collar with a name tag that said Hunter and included the owner's phone number. That's when we realized that either someone had adopted him or his original owner had finally given him a new color. Since this was the very first layer of paint for the portrait, I focused on laying out the pattern and the features of the face, marking where the dark fur was and where the lighter fur would go. As you can see, at that moment on, the paint was still wet, making it difficult to create contrast between dark and light fur on his face. Since I've been through this before, I didn't panic at that moment. I knew that once the paint dried, I could layer over it, and that's when the contrast and highlights would really start to pop. At that point, I knew it didn't resemble the final painting at all, but I had to trust the process. I reminded myself that everything could be adjusted later, so I just needed to be patient. My family used to have a few pet dogs over time, and dogs are definitely sweet and loyal. You can always see their love, no matter what. But I didn't have much experience with cats. When Hunter came into our lives, it felt like he chose us, though he also became friendly with other people in the apartment complex. Cats are definitely very different from dogs. They love you, but on their own terms. Sometimes they're friendly when they want to be, but when you try to call them over to pet them, they'll just ignore you, leaving you thinking, this is strange. Creating Hunter's fur was pretty straightforward. For the darkest fur, which is essentially black, I used a mixture of burnt umber and ultramarine blue. For the brown fur on his face and body, I used straight raw umber. I think raw umber captures the brownish tones of animal fur really well, and I've used it in several of my animal paintings. I like using it because it has the perfect balance, not too strong like burnt umber, but just right for capturing those natural brown shades. When working on Hunter's eyes, I noticed they are bluish-green with more blue than green. To capture that, I mixed ultramarine blue, a little cadmium lemon, and a lot of white. Did you know that a cat's pupil constrict and become very small when they're outside due to the bright lights? But when they're indoors, the pupils dilate. That's pretty interesting, isn't it? Since the photos of Hunter were taken indoors, his pupils appear dilated, but I want to make them smaller to give the impression that he's outside. I took several photos of Hunter's eyes to use as references for the painting. Their eyes aren't just one solid color. You can see different patterns within them. I alternated between dark and lighter tones using a bit of raw umber to create texture. I think it's crucial to capture the eyes accurately, or at least as close as possible, because they're what make the painting come alive. Of course, for me, I thought it would take a few sessions to get it right. Once the paint dried, it became easier to layer on top and create more patterns and textures for the eyes. I also made a small change to the shape of his eyes. As you can see in the pictures, his eyes look very resting and judgmental, which isn't his usual round, friendly expression. I made them just a little more round to better capture his extra look. I continued working on the body fur. The face looked much better than in the first layer, but I knew I would still need to make a few adjustments, probably with another layer of paint in certain areas. At first, I was using a small filbert brush, size 2, but then I discovered that a flat brush of the same size worked much better. It gave me more sharpness and allowed me to clearly define the strands of fur. I think the best way for me to paint fur is to mix a darker tone than the lightest color fur I see. For example, Hunter chest fur is very light, but if you look closely, you can see a mix of both dark and light fur. I start by painting the darkest tones first, then layer in the highlights so they can really pop. The contrast between dark and light tones is what makes everything look natural and really stands out. Hunter is such a sweet cat, very loving and gentle with us, but he would sometimes get into fights with other animals. I think cats can be quite territorial, and those fights would sometimes leave him with open wounds on his body. Recently, after a fight, he didn't come to my place for a few days. When he finally showed up, I saw that the wound had gotten badly infected with pus building up around it. It looked really bad. I would try to clean and disinfect the wound. He would lie down and be very cooperative because he knew I was helping him. But despite that, it left a big hole on his body. The vet gave him some antibiotics, and that's when the wound started to heal. Without the antibiotics, the pus just kept building up and the wound wouldn't close at all. While he was healing, I kept him indoors most of the time, but sometimes he wanted to go outside, so I let him. Then one day, when the wound was still trying to heal, he went out and probably got into the fight with the same animal again. He came back with another deep wound, but this time very close to the old one. Luckily, he was still on antibiotics, so the second wound didn't get infected. It also started to close up and heal very well. For the body, applying the second layer of paint was fairly easy because the foundation was already laid down. I followed the same concept, starting with the darker tones and then adding the highlights with lighter tones to make them pop. think whiskers are pretty tricky because they need to be thin and fine. I tend to make them a little thicker and broken, but I guess it's just how it turned out. It didn't look too bad though. Now let's take a look at the final painting. Overall, I think the portrait turned out pretty well. It's actually better than I hoped for. I think the color choices is pretty good in capturing Hunter's features and liveliness beautifully. I like the background with dominantly raw Sienna. Even though there's room for improvement right there, I really hope you enjoy the painting process and Hunter's story. I'll see you next time.